Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So, Alhamdulillah, I'm now in Leicester recording a video for Ahli Sunnah TV, an exclusive. And today, inshallah, the brothers have asked me to speak about a few topics from this book. This is one of my more recent publications, Islamic Law is Not Misogynistic. It's a translation of the book La Dukril fil Fiqh by Imam Muhammad Taweel. Now, this book, first things first, don't worry, the cover, this is a provisional cover, it's been changed. The title is lower, the name at the bottom is a bit higher up, so that's been touched up. But it's very, very important that this book reach as many people as possible. This is what I'm aiming to do, and this is why I'm here. I do have another book with me, which I might talk about if I have some time at the end. Now, this topic of Islamic law is not misogynistic. This is something that is very, very relevant. It's something that Muslims get accused of, i.e. misogyny, of Islam is accused of being misogynistic. Now, what Imam Muhammad Taweel does in this book, and for those of you who don't know who he is, he was the main faqih and usuli at the Qarawiyyin University in Fez in Morocco. He passed away about 4 years ago, may Allah have mercy on him. This book, and you have to bear in mind here that Morocco is where a lot of modern feminist movements have come out of. People like Fatima Marnisi is Moroccan, I think she's actually from Fez, and some other figures. Now, what he's getting at here, and I think this is something that people need to understand because there's something deeper at play. So what we have to understand about misogyny, or this accusation of misogyny, is we have to actually go back to a deeper understanding of what fiqh is. Because or not just what fiqh is, but what a faqih or what a faqihah, a male faqih or a female faqih, what their role and what their duty is. First of all, the Quran and the Sunnah, all the ayat in the Quran, the 6,000 ayat in the Quran, all the ahadith, for example, we know that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal memorized 1 million, do not cover, obviously, every single little issue that comes up in every time and place throughout human history. So, this means that we have to have ijtihad. There has to be a case where the people who are qualified to ijtihad, the high-ranking scholars, they have to look at the evidences in front of them, they have to look at the book, look at the sunnah, and then come to the conclusion that this is the ruling. Because we don't have a clear text on this topic, we have to make ijtihad. Now, what the faqih does is the faqih relies on the evidence, looks at the evidence, and comes to a conclusion. And that conclusion is simply what they find. So what Imam Muhammad Taweel says is the faqih is not doing something out of his own choice or desire or volition. Rather, what the faqih is doing, what he's doing is very similar to what a discoverer does. Someone who creates a discovery. Someone who is doing archaeological work or something like this, and then they find a rare mineral or they find a rare rock, and then they call it that thing. They might attach their name to that rock. That doesn't mean they made that rock, or that they chose to find that rock. Rather, they simply found it, and the name's ascribed to it. So, when we bear that in mind, we can now address this issue of Islamic law being misogynistic, because where this accusation comes from is this understanding that, it's really a misunderstanding, that because the majority of fuqaha from the time of the companions, may Allah be pleased with all of them, throughout history, because the majority have been men, therefore it's these men who have come together as men and are interpreting the book and the sunnah to benefit men. Right? They're seeing themselves as a group, identifying as men. They're vying for power, and therefore women and their interests have to be prejudiced against and marginalized so that they can further their own interests. And this, again, falls into stuff I've talked about on my own podcast. If you go on my own podcast, the Forward channel, I did a long podcast called Islam, Communism, and Cultural Marxism, and then in brackets, Postmodernism. Because postmodernism, this dominant belief now in academia in the Western world, in the Anglosphere, pushes hard this idea of identity politics and this idea that that group identity is paramount. This is the key thing. The group identity is paramount, and groups are competing with each other for power. So whether it's, and those group divisions could be based on gender, could be based on race, could be based on religion, it could be based on sexuality. So what has happened is that this postmodernist identity politics idea has been transplanted onto Islam. It's been put into fiqh. So we're assuming that, okay, we look at fiqh, we say, okay, there are male fuqaha, there are female fuqaha, faqihat, female jurists, male jurists, and they are somehow, we're supposed to believe that they are somehow in competition with one another, they're in some sort of power struggle, and the men got in there first, they took over, they interpreted the book and the sunnah, and therefore we get all these laws that appear to prejudice women. So, what Imam Muhammad Taweel does in this book is he refutes this whole notion. He says, no, the faqih and the faqih, whether it's the male faqih or the female faqih, they're not thinking on those lines. They're not thinking in those terms. They're not thinking, well, I'm a man, I have to interpret it this way, or I'm a woman, I have to interpret it this way. No, they're simply looking at the evidence and drawing their own conclusions to the best of their ability. So, like an example I think I mentioned earlier in the conversation, if someone is a detective investigating a crime scene, or maybe a judge in court, and the judge has to look at all the evidence, listen to all the witness testimonies, and then draw a conclusion. Whatever conclusion the judge draws in that court case, that's not his will or his volition or his choice. It's just simply what the evidence leads to. So what Imam Muhammad Taweel, so I'll open the book and show you a few examples here, is he goes into examples, because he has a section here called The First Ignorance, the Meaning of Fiqh. He goes into examples of where there appears to be there's a disagreement between a male faqih and a female, right, a faqihah, where they disagree. But the male opinion favors the woman, and the female opinion does not favor the woman, right? So one of these clear examples is page 35. The right of a woman who is divorced irrevocably, meaning she can't be returned. It's a final divorce. The husband cannot take her back. During her husband's illness, she has the right to inherit from him. Now, what we have here is, he says this, Fatima bint Qais, right? Fatima bint Qais, this is a Sahabiya, it's a woman. Fatima bint Qais, she's one of the first women to migrate to Medina. She held the position that such a woman does not deserve expenditure or accommodation, right? So there's a woman saying that a woman who is divorced irrevocably, she has no right to be spent on, she has no right to receive any money, and she has no right to accommodation. While Omar, may Allah be pleased with him, so Omar ibn al-Khattab, he holds the position that she deserves both. She should have expenditure and accommodation. And then Aisha then comes to agree with Omar, right? And then he gives the positions, differences between the madhabs. For example, the Malikis say that she deserves accommodation but not expenditure. The Hanbalis go with Fatima's position, and the Hanafis go with Omar's position, right? This is what Imam Muhammad Taweel says. Now, if you're watching this and you are a Hanafi, that might be wrong. I know the Hanafi madhab, there are a lot of positions, a lot of issues. You feel free to leave comments below, but please don't hold that against me. But that is an example of where a man and a male faqih and a male jurist and a female jurist differ on issues. And there are seven other examples, or 8 other examples that the Imam gives that readers can look at. Now, I want to bring in at this point, because the brothers made this request to bring this point, we have to also understand a lot of things about feminism. So I would recommend for listeners to watch a recent podcast I did, which was like a virtual book launch of this book. It's actually the same title as the book, Islamic Laws Not Misogynistic, where myself and Al-Hajj Abu Ja'far al-Hanbali, we talked a lot about issues in the book. We also talked about, I let him talk a lot about some of these beliefs that come out of the Anglosphere, like Guyism and Lilithism, and I recommend that you listen to that podcast and you get those points. But one of the things about feminism, this is something that Imam Taweel touches on in the book. Feminism, and we've had these 3 waves of it, the first wave feminism, the second wave feminism, the third wave feminism. The ultimate goal here is trying to destroy the family. This is something that really, really has to be kept in mind. The goal here is to destroy the family. And that's why if you go back to the podcast I did on Islam, communism, and cultural Marxism, and that's based on an article I wrote that's on my blog called Cultural Marxism. The point is this. and this might sound like a long spiel, but it's worth mentioning. You cannot create, this is the case, if you want to create, these people out here, the globalists, they want to create a one world government. This one world government that they have in mind is a communist one world government. You can't create a communist one world government unless people are dependent on the government. You have to create dependent, feeble people. It doesn't work any other way. Now, how do you do that? Now, naturally, people have support networks, right? When you're coming up, when you're born, you grow up, you have a support network. You have your family, you have your religious community, you have your neighborhood, and so forth. But the family is key. The family is absolutely key. That is the cornerstone of society. That's the foundation stone of society, is the family. If you can break up the family, then you can break up that support network, and then you can push people to rely on the government. It's a very, very interesting thing. And when you look at families where the father's been made absent, and one of the things I put in that article, for example, was the nature of the welfare state, like the nature of the welfare state in the United States. And I recommend people look up books by, or videos by economists, especially Thomas Sowell and Walter E. Williams from the United States. Now, Thomas Sowell, one of the things he said about the black family, he said the black family in the United States, what's called the black family, he said that this family, it survived the transatlantic crossing, it survived slavery, it survived the American Civil War, it survived, it's called World War I, World War II, the Great Depression between them, but the black family did not survive welfare. It did not survive the welfare state, because you create these incentives where you say to a woman that if she has kids and there's no man in the house, she's entitled to this much money from the government. So that creates an incentive for a woman just to have babies and babies and babies, but not have a man in the house. This breaks up the family. Then you have kids growing up, they don't know who their father is. Boys especially growing up and not having a male role model, and this leads to spiraling crime rates. And he showed this. I mean, Thomas Sowell's, the statistics are just absolutely galling, where if you go pre-welfare state, which again, I'm guessing this is pre-1965 roughly, the amount of, I think black children born out of wedlock was something in the range of maybe 20-25%. Again, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but it's written on my blog, that article. And now it's above 70%. The amount of children born out of wedlock is now above 70%. So this is an example of families being destroyed and people being made dependent on the state. And feminism is the same thing. And this is why people go online. There's an interview with a film producer who's passed away. His name's Aaron Russo. He did some movies in the 1980s. Now he was a film producer, and then he once ran for governor of Nevada, and I believe this interview was done in 2006. He ran for governor of Nevada, and while he was running, he got approached by the powers that be. It was someone from the Rockefeller. It was Nicholas Rockefeller from the Rockefeller family, who approached him and tried to recruit him for their club, so to speak. Now, Aaron Russo tells the story. He says that Nicholas Rockefeller said to me, "What do you think women's lib was about? What do you think the women's liberation movement was about?" And this is the movement that started in the 1960s in the United States. And Aaron Russo said, "Well, I thought it was all about, women's rights and giving women equality and freedom and women's progress and all these kinds of things." And Nicholas Rockefeller just looked at him and just said, "You idiot, right? You're just an idiot." And Aaron Russo says, "Well, why am I an idiot?" And Nicholas Rockefeller says, "Who do you think funded that whole thing?" Right? It was the Rockefeller Foundation. We funded the whole thing. We were behind that. So why would you do that? And he says, "Well, it's simple. Because we wanted women in the workplace. Before that, women were at home. They were with their families. They were raising their kids. We wanted women in the workplace so that, number one, we could get taxes off them, because we get more of the population working, therefore they pay more taxes. And number two, they're away from their kids. And we can put the kids into schools and nursery schools at an earlier age and start the indoctrination process from an earlier age." There's reasons behind this, and so you have to. So as Muslims, we need to really wake up to these kinds of things and see, when we see a lot of movements coming out of the Anglosphere, stuff that's being pumped out by the mainstream media, being pumped out by politicians and celebrities and these kind of people. We have to stop and think about, what is the real reason behind this? So that's what the Imam is getting at in this book, that this whole feminist movement and this attacking Islam for being misogynistic, the real objective here is to break up the family, right? Because once you can break up the family, then you can enslave everyone, because then because people don't have families anymore, therefore people don't have support networks anymore, and therefore people have to do what? They have to turn to the government. They have to turn to their own state for help, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's not what we do as Muslims. We're supposed to be self-reliant, independent people. That's what we're supposed to be like. We're supposed to be working hard, striving, and providing for ourselves and providing for our families.